Welcome to Slow Saturday Nights, Nirman, and good to connect with you again. And the intent, of course, is to kind of have you talk a little bit about your journey. You're literally the youngest founder that I've had here, right? It's awe-inspiring, the fact that you've been able to do so much. And I think you have a really, really nice and interesting story to tell about your journey to where you are and obviously AI. Um, so let's maybe start, at the beginning. So this is not your first startup. You're 24
Right.
and you've had one stint, one exit. So let's
Mhm.
start there, right? Let's start about how that part of the journey started off.
Yeah, so I grew up in India. I grew up in this place called Rajkot, that's in Gujarat. And after high school, I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I said I'm going to take a gap year, and then we're going to see where this gap year goes. And I think at the time, my goal for the gap year was to study for a bunch of exams, like entrance exams for colleges, and then see where I land. And I was kind of doing that, and then eventually, somehow, while doing that, I kind of stumbled upon this friend of mine at a conference who said, there's a conference that's happening in Barcelona. And if we apply with an idea and we get selected, they fly you there for free. So I was like, hey, in a gap year, you don't have much to do anyway. Why not come up with a bunch of different ideas and see if we can get a free trip to Barcelona? And I think that's where this idea started. So we applied with a bunch of different ideas under different names, and we wanted to see which one gets selected. And we had a bunch of complicated ideas. Like at the time, Google Glasses were pretty famous, and so
Right.
we said, we're going to do a workshop with conference attendees on how to make your own Google Glass. And we had these bunch of different ideas, and one of the idea there was that we're going to help people build their own electrical circuits without using wires,
Mhm.
right? So typically, if you want to build an electrical circuit, you have to plug in the batteries and the wires, and then there's a bulb that lights up. But you could actually use pencil lines to conduct electricity, and you could light up small LEDs or small buzzers and make them sound, right? And this is kind of like a sixth grade physics, because like pencils have graphite that conduct electricity. So this was pretty exciting. So we said, let's actually apply with this idea as well. And eventually that was the idea that got selected. So we didn't know what we could do with it, right? And now all of a sudden we had to go to Barcelona and do a workshop, and we all we cared about was a free trip. But we also had to do a workshop because we got selected. So
Right.
we didn't know how to go about with it. So what we did was we took a bunch of different polythene bags, and we would kind of have this little piece of paper in it. There'd be a little pencil in it so you can draw lines, and we had a couple of little LEDs and a little button cells in it, and we would kind of make these about like 100 or 200 of those polythene bags with just these little items in it. And we took all of that to Barcelona, and we said we're going to do a workshop. We're going to teach people how to build their circuits with pencils, right? And
Right.
we really didn't care about teaching. We were there for the trip. And so what happened was we were working with a lot of these kids, and kids started to get super creative with it. And there was a kid that ended up building what was called a little guitar. So he had a buzzer that was kind of fit over here, and there was a big kind of battery. And then every time he would kind of swipe his fingers through the pencil lines, it would buzz the buzzer. And those were pretty exciting things that they came up with. And then we had parents that came up to us and said, how much should we pay for this kit? And you can imagine we were thinking like it's just a bag with paper, pencil, and LED cells in it. Like, what do you mean pay for it, right? Like it took us like 2, 3, 4, or 5 rupees to make one of them, and here people are asking to pay for it. So we said, okay, why don't you give us 10 euros for it? And so we were making 10 euros per bag, and that was also pretty exciting. So we realized we could actually,
Monetize all of this.
monetize this, make it into a product, right? So
Right.
we came back to India. We said we're gonna build a product, we're gonna sell it, and we kind of came up with these really beautifully designed booklets and beautifully designed kits, right? So they weren't just pencil and paper in a bag, but they're this beautiful designed boxes with different things that kids could do with it. And we came up with that, and we built 500 of those because we were very confident we're gonna sell them out. And it wasn't very complicated to do that. It was very cheap. So we built 500 of those, and we said we're gonna sell it, right? So we went from parents to parents that we knew in our circle, and we said we're building this. Do you want to buy it? And nobody really bought it. Like we had few people that bought it just so that we feel good about it, and they wanted to support us, but nobody really kind of bought the kits. Then we started to go to schools, and we said, why don't we sell it to an entire school, right? And get all the kids will get it for free, and the schools pay for it. So that didn't happen as well. Like it was really tough to find the right people in the school, and schools were very stringent upon where they want to spend and all that stuff. Um, and so we were presenting at Maker Fair. It's kind of like Maker Fest in India, and we said, why don't we present there and we'll see what comes out of it, right? So again, this was during a gap year. I wasn't really like doing this as a full time thing, or there was no risk associated with it. It wasn't even a startup. It was just like trying to sell. And in Maker Fair, we actually came across this lady who used to work with Intel, and she said that she, heads the corporate social responsibility. And through the CSR, we could actually work with Intel in kind of distributing these kits to kids, so the children get it for free, and Intel ends up paying for it. And we were like, okay, that's awesome, right? Like our first actual sale. And we had 500 of those, and we said, how many do you want? And she said, 10,000. So I was like, oh, we can do it. Like, sure, we can make 10,000 of those, and
So you
it'll
were
be fine.
hustling.
And yeah, we were like, yeah, we just said yes, right? Of course, we can do it. And we said, when do you want it by? We can give it to you. And so she asked me, when can you give it to me by? And I said, we can give it to you in about 2 or 3 months or something.
Hmm.
And she was like, oh no, we want it in like less than a week, right? We can
Right.
extend to a week and a half, really, if we push it. And we were like, holy shit, like we had no clue how to make 10,000 of those in about a week's time. um, at the moment, I just said yes. We ended up coordinating. I called my co-founder at the time, and we ended up coordinating this in a very fun way. We got a bunch of these raw materials, and I stayed at my co-founder's place that was in Baroda. We got a bunch of, and he had, and his grandma had like this network of grandmas that was in the society, right? So you can imagine like all grandmas just get together to chat in the society, and they were all there. So we said, why don't you all just help us assemble these kits?
Right.
And they kind of did that every day. They would come and chat, and they would help us assemble kits, and we were able to kind of produce those kits in like less than a week,
Right.
without kind of massive costs to it. And so that became our first company. And eventually we kind of worked with other companies to do very similar setup, and found kind of a business model and a market fit. And then eventually we gave the distribution rights to Intel. So that was kind of my first experiences building something, stumbling upon it, and really, going through that process. I think that year and a half of gap year was one of the best experiences, because I got to visit some of the most remote schools in India, and some of the most beautiful places in India, and work with kids over there, and work with people over there. So that was pretty exciting, and I guess that's kind of how it started.
Yeah. And this was what the so once you finish with this year and a half, your gap year done,
Yeah.
when did you decide that okay, Boston is where I'm heading, and why?
Yeah, I actually didn't have much of a solid idea of, again, what I wanted to do. It was back to square one. And I was actually in touch with this professor called Lee Spector, and he used to head the genetic programming lab at Hampshire College in Amherst. And I was at the time pretty interested in AI and machine learning. I had no knowledge of it, right? I used to do programming. I've been coding since like sixth grade in middle school, and I was well versed with the idea of kind of making computer programs, but obviously AI at the time was kind of way out of my reach. So I would kind of build random kind of programs that would be like very basic level AI. And I would go to this guy and I'd say, hey, I've tried building this. Why didn't you check it out? And we'd go back and forth on some of those things. And, eventually, he convinced me to apply to Hampshire, and, got a good scholarship there, and said, I've been chatting with this guy, let's just go. So we never really gave it a solid thought. And I guess that's kind of how I ended up in Boston.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And um, I think one of the experiences that you talked about earlier was an internship while at college, right? And that's
Right.
been kind of influential in the decisions that you took subsequently,
Mhm.
right? So, talk to us a little bit about, how did that happen? And I mean, all of this is happening when you were what, 20, 21?
Yeah, you'd say. So around, yeah, 1920 is kind of when I moved to here to Boston. And when I got to college, right, I think the first thing that I saw at college was there was no real community around kind of international students. And especially I was in a smaller college, right? If I was probably at like University of Massachusetts or one of those really large, massive, 50,000 people colleges, I'm sure there'll be a community. But I was at a very, very small college, small liberal arts college. So I said, actually, why don't we find a community that we can build for people that are makers, right? And I was very influenced by kind of the maker culture that was in Ahmedabad, right? They had these hackathons and they had these fab labs, right, where people would come together and just make random things. And I was very excited about it. I was very passionate about it. So I said, why don't we kind of build out a hackathon at
Right,
my college, right? And I think that's was what was the first thing that I set up when I was at Hampshire, is kind of started to build out this hackathon with a group of other students, and it became kind of this massive hackathon. We were kind of hoping for a couple hundred people to kind of come and join the event. We eventually got close to 1,000 people in the first event. And I think that was very exciting because that allowed me to do a lot more operational work than
mhm,
I'd ever done before. So this
right,
was this was fundraising from companies like Microsoft and Viacom to fund the hackathon. This was actually working with people to bring the devices and do the distribution of that and kind of manage those logistics. And obviously, event planning is a great way to kind of learn how to do logistics, in my opinion. So I think it just worked out very well in that sense. We eventually did a second event at Hampshire, which is the same thing, second year. And at that time in the second event, we ended up raising over $100,000, which for a college student is kind of crazy.
right.
So we said we're going to do $100,000 event, and it was just like eventually it just turned into a bunch of college students just hanging out and building random things and just enjoying themselves. But that was quite crazy. Something that we just did. Uh, and then I think at that point I had this epiphany which was like, I can't keep doing hackathons all my life, right? I got to get a job.
Right,
And just like any other college student, I think in my second year or close to my third year, I said, let's find an internship, right? So I, did the classic. I went on to like job searches and looked up all the internships. And what happened was they had these long forms, right? And everyone said, tell me about yourself and like why are you excited about computer science. And my responses to all those questions were like, well, I've been doing it for so long, I just love doing it. Like, they weren't like one of those like movie like responses, right? Like
right,
that people would expect that,
right.
oh, I was, I never wanted to do this, but here's something happened. So they were like always very straightforward. And I said, it doesn't make sense for me to kind of fill out these forms like with the same questions, right? At one point I just had like would copy paste responses. So I said, let's do something different, right? Because if I'm going this route, every other college student in the world is going this route, and this is not going to be meaningful. And this is probably not going to put me in front of the right people that I want to talk to. And so I said, I knew one thing, which was that any company that's recently funded is more likely to be hiring.
Right,
So I went onto Sequoia's website and I looked at the top 10 companies that funded, and I emailed 10 of them, right? And obviously these are companies that I like, that I personally would relate to, that I would have used the product at least, so those kind of companies. They weren't like something like totally in biotech that I have no interest in, right? So I found some companies that I was interested in that were recently funded, emailed all of them, and I said, look, I'm Nirman. I've done a couple of projects in the past, and I'm interested in seeing if you have an internship. And one of them reached out to me and said, we don't have an internship, but if you want to apply for a full-time role, we'd be more than happy to accommodate. and kind of evaluate you basically, right? And then he said in brackets, he said, college is for suckers anyway. And then I knew that I was talking to like a classic, Silicon Valley founder at the time. So I said, I don't think I'm going to drop out anytime soon, but why don't you make me an exception, right? So we went back and forth on email. He talked to me about the kind of games that I like to play. Obviously, it was a gaming company, and eventually I landed my first internship in San Francisco from a cold email. So I think that was kind of one of the first moments where you realize those things were like, oh, how interesting a cold email could be if you do it right.
Right.
And I think that kind of became the first time I came here. I started to work with him, and he was one of the most influential people in my life, because a lot of the stuff that I did later on, he became as a mentor figure to it. But yeah, I think that's kind of how my first internship came to being, which was pretty exciting.
Yeah, yeah. The hustle kind of shines through. Talk a little bit more about mentoring, mentorship, and your approach to it. I think that was really interesting, right? So, I mean, you reached out on cold email. I think
Mhm.
that's an area that not a lot of really young people know how to kind of work, right?
Mhm.
In terms of how do I, who do I ask for advice, and how and what can they really help me with? And
Right.
somehow you've kind of hit the nail on the head each time. You've kind of found this person at
Mhm.
Intel, and then this person at the
Mhm.
gaming company, and these are relationships that you've managed to sustain over the years. um, Talk a little bit about that, because that's really what mentorship is, right? It's a two-way
Right.
street, and there's the synergy that you managed to
Yeah.
establish so young, right? So talk about that.
I think there are two frames of thought for it, right? I think the first frame of thought is, first of all, I think any mentor is someone that is, just seamlessly becomes a part of your life, I
Right.
believe. And it's someone that you personally would go get a beer with, right? You'd kind of be willing to share, things that would be personal, or just kind of talk. And I feel like that kind of, person, is just someone that comes through. You can't really go out and say, will you be my mentor? Will you be my mentor? I don't think that really does work out. But what happened with me was, I worked with this guy. His name was Murthy, by the way. So I worked with Murthy at Streamlabs, which was the company I used to work with. And eventually I went there second time around, to do another internship for the second year, for the next summer. And during that time, I had the idea of Obviously AI, which was that I was the only data science person at that company. And every marketing analyst, business analyst would come up to me and say, hey, can you help me build these regression models or these classification models? And I would sit there and I'd be like, hey, I'm really here and excited to work on bigger problems, but I'm doing these simple machine learning models for these guys. And so can we build a tool that allows anyone to build their own AI models, right? So that was where the idea of Obviously I started. And then I went to him and I said, look, I have this idea that I'm excited about. I don't know where to start, but I've heard the common feedback has been to apply at accelerators, right? So I think I'm gonna, quit this internship and focus on this. And while I'm here in the Bay, I might as well make use of the kind of culture that's here for early stage startups. So he was super supportive. My co-founder also did that with his CEO at the time, and they were both super supportive. And they kind of would help us, build out responses of how to reply, how to fill out YC application forms, stuff like that. And what that did was that kind of allowed us to be in a mindset of how to be concise and clear. And I think that became more and more important as we did our pitches early on for the business. I think early on it's about having that clarity about the business and the market that becomes important, and later obviously it's customers and the product. So I think that was where they really helped. But I think eventually what it really comes down to, and I think this is very important for me as well, is it's not about whether there's someone to give you advice or not, because there will be just so many people all the time willing to give you advice. Eventually it does come down to what advice do you want to listen to.
Mhm.
And I think that becomes your everyday job. So I think mentor has to be someone that you just enjoy spending time with,
Mm-hmm.
and that you personally respect. But then at the end of the day, what advice do you actually want to take and listen to will be your own choice, as well. So I guess
Right.
that.
This journey has been really interesting on several levels, and I think one of the pieces that contribute to how great the story is of course the age aspect, but also talk about being a first generation immigrant and how that has kind of played out in your journey so far. What are some of those experiences? What's let's go from extreme to extreme, right? What's the
Right.
best experience that you had as a first generation immigrant and such a young person trying to start something out there, and what was the worst, right? Both ends of the spectrum.
I think as first generation immigrants, we often believe that we have a lot to lose.
Yeah.
And this perception comes specifically because your parents in India have worked so hard. They've fought tooth and nail to get you to the US and study and get a better education and better life. And then you have these expectations that I better get a good job and be able to make money enough to send it back to my parents. Right. I think that's like a pretty immigrant thought process. In that journey somewhere, you start to believe that you have a lot to lose, because if this doesn't work out, if your visas don't work out, if you don't get good grades, you have to go back, and it is kind of wasted the amount of energy that your parents have put, right? And I think that's one of the key things that goes on as a first gen immigrant. It's the ground reality of it is as much true as it is. But I think when you kind of switch that mindset to really think you don't have anything to lose, right? And what, even if you have to go back, you have a safety net, which is your home back in the country. I think when you switch that mindset, what really happens is you become more, risk taking. You can be like, oh, I can take risks, and worst that would happen is, I lose my visa, I go back home, and I figure things out from there. And I think that has really helped us a lot. So when we came here, we were doing our internships. We said, look, school is great, and it's not that extraordinary, right? We thought we were going to learn some, we were going to have this epiphany about life and learn something extraordinary, but it was just courses and stuff that we would learn ourselves on YouTube. I think we also had some of the professors or some courses that were so early that were a requirement that we had to take, which were so simple that sometimes, we would be more up to date with what's the latest out there than the professors themselves. And so those kind of things started to happen. So we weren't really excited about being in college. Then when we were here, we said, we don't have anything to lose. We're in the Bay Area. And the worst thing that happens is if we don't build a business, we have an idea, we have a couple of people willing to use it. If we don't actually build this product, worst thing will happen is we're going to stay in the grind, and we'll see what happens. But if we do build it, and it works, that's great, right? And if it doesn't work, we go back to college, or we go back to India and then figure things out. And I think that risk tolerance kind of helped. So we quit our internships. We used to live in this Airbnb, and I don't know if you know this, but this would resonate with a lot of people in their 20s doing their internships in SF. Is it becomes very crowded during summer because all the students are in the Bay Area. And so what happens is that they would have these apartments with a bunch of different bunk beds in it, and it would cost you $1,000 a month to get a single bunk bed, and you'd be living crammed in a house with like 25 people each living in a bunk bed, right? And I wasn't one of those, and my co-founder was with me as well, who was my friend from college. So we decided to leave this internship. Obviously we had some money, but we didn't have enough to kind of pay $1,000 a month for bunk beds. And so we again did what we did best, which was cold email, and basically emailed the homeowner and said, we're thinking of doing this. We don't have a lot of money. We come from different countries, and would you be willing to help us out here? And she was kind enough. She said, why don't you live in the basement, and if you are willing to help me with some of the chores in the house and manage the people that come to clean and maintain it, I'd be more than happy to have you around. So we got a little spot in the basement. We started to work on this product, and I think eventually from there on, we had a bunch of different fun experiences pitching to VCs and really kind of going through that ups and downs. Initially, we didn't get any response. I think the summer ended, we didn't get anyone that wanted to fund us. Users were using us, but they weren't like, power users. Like they were kind of reluctantly using us because the product was half baked at the time. And so we said, let's kind of go back to school and see what happens, right? So we go to Boston, and the moment we reach Boston, we get a call saying, from an accelerator here saying, we'd like to talk to you for a 15-minute meeting. Why don't you fly down? We're willing to pay for your flights. We're like, that's great. So we flew back, and we had our first conversation with Skydeck. That was the accelerator here in Berkeley. And I think the application for that was also very, very interesting because that also has a cold email story to it. But anyway,
No,
we
go
had our
on.
first.
Tell us about that too.
I think the story with Skydeck goes this way. We go to Sky. We actually opened a list of websites online, and we said we're going to apply to every single accelerator that's out there, and we'll see whatever resources we could get to kind of understand how to build things, right? And we applied to a bunch of those accelerators. Um, with Skydeck, when we went to their website said applications have been closed. Come back 6 months later, and we were like, oh, that's not going to happen. So we emailed those guys, like cold email, and we said, hey, we know applications have closed, but we really wanted to see if there's any open spots. And so there were two people that were working there. One of them emailed saying, we can't do anything, come back 6 months later. The other one said, you know what, we can kind of squeeze you in. Here's the link. And, why don't you kind of set up a call? And so we just ignored the first email. And then, as if we had never received it. And then with this other person, we started the dialogue, and, we got that interview call. So I think that was pretty exciting as well. But yeah, so one thing led to another, but I think that's the moment you flip that, right? Which is like, I have a lot to lose, to like, I don't have anything to lose. Like my home is my safety net. Then with that mindset, you just have more risk taking.
And talk to us about the cohort that you ended up with at Skydeck and how that's played out as well, right? In terms of influencing. Uh,
Right. So Skydeck was very exciting because when we first got that first round of funding, it was kind of a real money that we had ever kind of gathered. And coming as immigrants, right? Like anything more than $1,000 is like a lot of value. And you instantly, like initially when you come here, you have this thought process. You're going to convert every dollar figure to your rupees, and so initially when we got the Skydeck funding, we were very happy, but we also thought to ourselves, like, we just got lucky. Like there's no way like anyone would ever fund us because we don't know anything that we're doing. And I guess that was the point of an accelerator, right? To help founders understand what to do better. So Skydeck was very exciting. And I made some of the best, friends that I have today at Skydeck, because these are all, similar founders at similar stages. And then you're kind of talking about the same problems, and you kind of bond over things. Initially, you bond over like problems in the startup. Eventually, you bond over talking about VCs that you're talking to and kind of getting that inside scoop from each other, right? Oh, I talked to this guy as well. This was my experience, stuff like that. So
right.
I think that kind of community was presented by Skydeck. And in addition to that, obviously, we got a lot of training around, how to approach investors and how to fundraise and how to build a product and how to execute some of those things. But I think the biggest takeaway was that community of people, because obviously there's just so much more you learn even after the accelerator. I think you start to learn after the accelerator. Is just like you feel like you're learning, and then you're like in the real world. But I think what accelerator gives is that community of people, and I think that has been helpful.
So with obviously, I think of the you've been with you set this up a couple of years ago. You've gone through COVID with all of this. You have a small team in place. You're targeting funding, and you've had this ginormous number of conversations with the venture funding community. How has that been? What has the response been? What has your approach been, and what's worked for you?
Mhm.
And tell us a little bit about the bigger. the biggest failure on that
Mhm.
path, right?
Right. I think so. Early on, when we were fundraising, we were fundraising on a story, right? Which is that idea that we think the world is going to be this way, and that's why we're building this to take the world there. And I think what happens is, when you're fundraising with a story, you are pretty unclear about the market yourself. And so, how do you sell a product that you yourself don't know in the market? As I think, even before our accelerator funding, when we were kind of just pitching around, we spent a lot of time with this one VC that kind of led us on for a while, and we spent a lot of time with them. And I remember having conversations saying, "Hey, we're a predictive analytics tool. We help you predict outcomes, without writing code from your data." And this person asked us, "Well, tomorrow, if there's a tsunami that wipes out my customer base, and that customer churns, can you help me predict that?" And we were like, "No, we're not God that we would do that." Right. And they kind of were very convincing. And they said, "Why don't you build a feature that allows you to predict, externalities, and then kind of mix it into your predictions and stuff?" And we were like, that's a really great idea. And so we go to an investor after that and we say, here's what we're doing. The investor was super excited and they said, "That's awesome. What's on your roadmap?" And we said, "We're going to, bring in externalities prediction," just because someone else had told us we should say that. Right. And this was an investor. So we said, "We're going to build this thing." And they're like, "That's not going to work." Right. And we were like, "Yeah, we know it's not going to work," but we pretended as if like we disagreed and we moved on. But we really deep down, we knew it wasn't going to work. And then we got to the other investor after that, the next one. We said, "Look, this is what we're building." And this time they asked us what's in our roadmap. We said, "We don't know. We still yet to figure that out, but we think we're going to probably do X, Y, Z." And we didn't mention the whole
Externalities.
externalities. Yeah. And this investor ended up being our first check-in, right? That was Skydeck. And what we realized at that point was investors don't know anything about your product or your market. And they'll probably only know initially everything that you tell them about your product and market, because you're supposed to be the expert there, right? And if you listen to investors for product ideas, that's not going to go anywhere because it's just going to be waste of everyone's time. So really, the only people that matter is literally your users. So I think that was kind of the first kind of thing that hit me. Eventually, with the fundraise, we did a lot of different things. We would try to say a story a certain way. We would kind of spend hours building a pitch deck and all that stuff, right? But at the end of the day, what really, really mattered was, are we building something that people wanted and they were excited to use? And I think for about a long period of time, we really didn't see that as kind of the major piece. We always thought the story was the big thing.
Hmm.
But at one point we raised fairly small amount of capital, and we said, okay, why don't we go out and just focus on the product, just focus on talking to users and seeing what's working, what's not working. And in February 2020, right before COVID started, we had launched our product.
Right.
We were lucky enough to have like number 4 in product hunt. We got a lot of users from there, and today we have over 3,000 businesses that use the tool. So that was an exciting kind of process. And now what happens is, because you built a product that people want, because your product is so empathetically designed and built, and it's kind of something that people can try and use, and because obviously you spend so much time, you get clarity about the market. You understand where the business is going, what are the trends, why you are important and you can stand out. And now what happens is that the tables change, in the sense that investors find you because you're actually building something that's at the forefront of this new and emerging industry, and you have users. So investors find you, and then you get that privilege to pick the investors that you want. So I think the early on, driving a startup from the mindset of let me fundraise doesn't really get you anywhere, but instead driving a startup from the mindset of this is going to be a business, right? And let's focus on it that way. I think that really gets you far. And I think luckily or weirdly enough, Topo and I, my co-founder and I, we've always thought every time we get a funding in, and especially in early stages when we get those angel checks in, we would think we just got lucky and nobody should ever fund us and nobody will ever fund us. And so we should make the most out of this money in the most minute way to make at least this much money back. right? And we
Right.
never had that tech mindset, because the tech mindset is raise a little, burn it all, and then just have the growth. And even if your revenues aren't matching, doesn't matter. But I think that mindset we changed, and we approach it as a classic business, and I think that's when things started to turn around. So I think that helped us quite well.
You made a really interesting point, and you talked a little bit about the product evolution, right? How you actually kind of validated with your first user and your first buyer, right? So that was an interesting journey, an anecdote. So talk to us a little bit more about, bringing that first guy on board and the lengths that you guys had to go to and how you figured out, because nobody
Mhm.
had the answers. It's a emerging space.
Yep. I think the very first version we ever built was kind of very engineering and very technical. The goal was we wanted to build a product that helps you build AI models without a background data science, without any programming, right? And so we thought of like this very simple kind of Amazon Web Services like setup, which we thought was very simple, by the way. And we said, okay, you upload your data, you pick a couple of buttons, then you pick the model you want to build, and then you pick the hyperparameters you want those for those models, and then you click next, and our system will kind of build that out and spit it back to you. And we had this like amazing setup that we thought was the best. And so we went to this person that we were testing with, who was, by the way, someone I used to work with as well. So it was pretty much our close network. And we went to this guy and we said, we're going to do a demo of this tool, and you tell us what you think and use it and show us. And he was very excited. It was very helpful. So we do this demo. We talk for like 15 minutes. We show how things work, and we're like, look, this awesome thing's gonna work this way, and this awesome thing's gonna work this way. And we do all these demos, and then we tell them, hey, now why don't you use it, and you tell us like how you found it, right? We're going to observe you, because that's what everyone was telling us, just observe your user, sit and use. And we said, please use it. And so he was there, he was kind of looking at the screen. Our software was open, and he kind of moved around his eyes, and he was like, I think about 1 minute or so later, and about 1 minute of silence is a lot of time. It feels like a lot of time, even if it's 1 minute, right? So, but 1 minute of silence later, he kind of turned to me and I said, "What button should I click again?" And I was like, "Oh, okay. So he doesn't know what button to click." And I can understand and have a lot of sympathy now for like that start button on Windows, and I can understand what that would mean at the time. But I think we're very similarly, like this guy was like, I don't know what button to click, right? Where should I go first? And so being the engineers who had never done UI UX, never really understood all those intricacies of actually building a product, and we were trying to build something that was for non-technical people, and we were approaching it in a very wrong way. So I think that was a first encounter with understanding what kind of product to build and why it's important to have that user empathy in the product. Eventually, we kind of built out our first versions. We started to have a couple of people use it, and we had the first client that came in fully organically. Right. So this first person that came in didn't know us, hadn't heard about us before, but he read about us somewhere on the internet and decided to come to our website. So we started to talk to him, and he was pretty hesitant about the software, right? He was like, oh, I love the software, I want to take it to my boss, but I don't trust it. And we were like, why don't you trust it? Look, our models are so great. Look, the accuracy is perfect. We match the Kaggle data science competitions. Like everything that our system is producing is top notch, right? And we have these comparisons and these collaborations and stuff that we've done with Google Cloud, and why don't you trust us? And he's like, I just cannot trust it. And we started to talk more with him, and in all our conversations there was one thing that would repeatedly come up, was he would mention like the time, or he would say things like, oh, it was so fast, which I like, but I just don't trust, things like that. So he would say things like that a lot. um, and so we started to pick up on those words. And I think one of the common things he said was, I love that it's so fast, but this. Right? And every time he would complain, he would say, I love that it's so fast, but this. We said, maybe there's something there. Right. So we kind of started to slowly realize that, probably the reason he's not trusting it is because he's just so used to waiting for a long period of time to have a machine learning model built, and having something in like less than a couple of seconds is very fast for him. And he would just inherently feel like there's something wrong. So what we did was we decided to add some artificial delay to it. And then we went back to that guy and we said, oh, okay, why didn't you try it out? And he was kind of trying it out. And this time the progress bar didn't just snap and build through the model. Even if the model was built, it would just make this guy wait for like another 30 seconds for no reason at all. And then we had this very slow moving progress bar with this little animation with gears on it, and which would feel like there's a machine learning model being built, right? There's absolutely nothing happening during that time. And we went back to that guy and we said, we made some advanced tweaks, and this time the model is really set up to be the highest performing. Why don't we give it one more shot? And this time he came back to us and he said, this looks interesting. Let me actually talk with, our engineer and my head and his VP basically at the time. He said, well, let me talk to my engineer and my VP and kind of get back to you on it. And, it took him a couple of days, but then eventually when he came back, it was more positive conversation. It was like, we'd love to kind of give it a shot with some of our production data and, see what it turns out. And we were like, great. So we had our first POC. And I think, those things, again, very product oriented, very UX oriented, that we started to pick up on users, became more and more kind of critical as we designed, the first no code AI solution for non-tech people. And I think, little things like these have kind of added to what the product is today and where our journey has been.
Right, right. Uh, talk talk to me. I mean, tell us about the demo that you had. Right, one of the products. I think you were demoing it to the funding community, where you know. Talk to us about that really fun demo that you had.
Right, right. So this was way back when we didn't even have a product, and we were talking to our investors at the time, and what we had was a demo. Right, I wouldn't call it an MVP because an MVP is supposed to be something that works with a specific set of items and gives valuable results to a specific set of people. Right, so that ideally would be an MVP that works, but it works for only smaller use cases and actually gives value for whatever those small use cases are. We had a demo, right, which was that it would work for one thing. We had one spreadsheet that our system would work for. So that's our system would take in that spreadsheet. It would train a machine learning model and give the model back, right? And it would only work with that spreadsheet. If you uploaded another spreadsheet with a different file name, it would just not work. So you can imagine it was really designed to just show people what it looks like. It was kind of like a working, wireframe. Um, and so we went into this meeting. We were like, we're gonna be building this. This is kind of what the tool looks like today, things like that. And one person asked us and said, so he said, so if I was to use my own spreadsheet on it, will it give me exciting results? And at that point, we knew that it wouldn't work, right? But we just said, yeah, of course, like obviously it would give amazing results. And luckily, I don't think he tried uploading his own spreadsheet at the time, but that worked out fairly well for us. And eventually, we were able to build it out to work for all other spreadsheets, and now eventually with other data sources as well. But I think at that time it was pretty exciting because it was just like, let's wing it, let's see what happens, and we got lucky a little bit there.
And how has your experience been with hiring people, right? The space that you're in has people that come with a lot of experience, and you're just kind of starting out, and you're the boss. How's that experience been? And as an immigrant, somebody who's a student hiring people, tell us a little bit more about all of that and how that's
Yeah.
worked out for you.
So I think there are two kinds of hires. The first one are just hires that would do like basic repetitive tasks that can get things moving faster in production or in the company, so we can move faster as a team, right? So that those are hires that are people that are skilled about something and they can make you move faster. And I think the second type of hire is more strategic hire where you know they tell you what direction you should take the company and they really lead that charge. So A classic example is, a marketing person would be a strategic hire early on that would tell you what's the direction we should lead the company in. They would kind of plan experiments and test out ones that work and kind of really double down on ones that are important. Um, so I think for the first group of people, I think one thing we've learned the hard way is our initial hire, when we started to hire initially for our first kind of people that we were to bring on board. Um, we looked for a lot of different things, and we got very excited by resumes that had like Google and Adobe and these kind of big company names on it. We were like, oh, that's awesome, like someone at Google wants to work at a startup like us. Like, that's awesome, like, let's get this person. We got so excited. We had these like selection biases around that person. We would bring that person on, and about two or so months later, we realized that that person is amazing at what they do, but at a startup you have to wear multiple different hats, so they're very laser focused at like one thing that they're really good at. But then tomorrow, if their role has to expand just a little bit doing something else, they just fail at it. And so we started to realize that the kind of people we're going to hire at a startup are people that are more flexible, can wear multiple different hats, and obviously, a lot of those details. Um, but the real challenge kind of came in, hiring people that were way older than us and would do these strategic roles that would lead the company in a direction, when it came to marketing or something else. Like, so I think that's where it was just kind of acknowledging the fact that we don't know shit. Right? We're pretty young. We're kind of trying to build things out, and we don't know everything. And so the kind of people that we hire have to be people that will tell us what we should do, and we have to be able to kind of trust them enough and have that confidence in them and kind of follow their lead. And I think having that mindset has been fairly helpful so far.
Yeah. So, in this very eventful journey, Nirman, what do you believe have been your biggest wins or your biggest successes?
I think just the journey itself. I think you know I, it wouldn't have been any other job role in this world that I would be doing where I would get to learn something new every day. Like, this is the only job in this world, in this company, that luckily I started with my co-founder, that I literally get to learn every single aspect of business, something new that I could literally say every single day. Right? Maybe it could be something new in product or customers, or it's in investors or hiring, or it's on the kind of administrative side of things or like legal side of things. Right? I can literally tell you that I know something more than I knew yesterday. And I think that kind of growth, personally, is, I would say, a big win so far. Obviously, like, there have been some great milestones with the revenues and the customers and the fundraise, that we would consider wins. But I think the real win is me spending my 20s doing something that I absolutely love, and I can literally tell that I've been learning something new from, and I think that that's been helpful.
What would you change about your journey so far, given a chance, go back, do it over? What would you change?
Yeah, I think I think early on we were bombarded with advice around different things, on product, on revenue, and we never really realized that there were some of those advices that we took that weren't the right one. Right? For example, there's this common advice which is that you know focus on the revenue as soon as possible, which is important. Like, I wouldn't say it's wrong. Focus on the revenue as soon as possible, and even if you have a half baked product, just throw it out there and see what happens. And I think, although that advice sounds great in a lot of different industries and a lot of different types of apps, and I'm sure it has worked for a lot of people that are out there, but for a company like us that's B2B analytics, right, the bar is so high that if we have to build a product, it has to be at least 100x better than the bar itself. And so, kind of, no matter how early we are, just kind of bringing in a product that's like half baked is not going to get us anywhere. So we spent a lot of time initially just kind of oscillating between, let's get to revenue, and then we would really push like some of our early users to pay, be like, yeah, just pay, 150, 250, 350, but just pay anything, right? And those guys would, be kind of nice to us, so they would give some money, but eventually they would get pissed because the product is not, delivering any value that's significantly better than what they would get otherwise. And then we would be like, the product's not delivering value. Let's focus now all of a sudden on building great product. And so we'd stitch together anything that would create value for this user. And there'll be the next guy that comes in, and we would just go back and forth into this bad oscillation, right? So we spent about a fairly good amount of time going back and forth in that. And at one point, we had to just stop ourselves and say, look, like, before we ask anyone for money, let's actually build something that can give 100x better value than whatever the benchmark already is. And I think being able to really focus on that one thing at a time was super super helpful for us. Um, so I think probably if I was to change one thing, which that would be this, is to probably not take that advice, or really think through that advice, then just push customers with half baked product to pay, because that really didn't take us anywhere. And now I think we're at a position where people are willing to pay. Just I would wake up, I would see my Slack, we get a notification every time someone pays. I wake up, I'd see my Slack, and I'd have like 5 people that have converted that for new, just like in last couple of hours or something, right? So I think that kind of excitement is very real, because now the product is driving the job to convert users, and you don't have to like push people to be like, pay me, pay me, pay me. And nobody likes that. People want to pay for value, and I think if we had not taken that advice, we would be at least 2 years ahead of where we are as a company. So I think probably that's one thing that would change. But to be honest, I wouldn't even want to like really change it, because it's something that I would really take as learning, which I wouldn't have ever experienced otherwise, which was interesting.
Great. So, what would your advice be, Nirman, to somebody who's starting out now, right? If somebody is kind of wanting, waiting on the edge, kind of wanting to throw their hat in the ring, what would you tell them? How would you tell them to approach this entire
Yeah.
business of a startup?
I think I loved, there's this quote that Sahil Lavinga had posted on Twitter. He said that if you're thinking about starting a business, just start, because in the process of building what you think you want to build, you will learn what you should be actually building. And I think that's very, very true. Those are not my words, but those are some wise words, I guess, which I resonate a lot with, because I strongly believe that you start out thinking you want to build something certain way, and then eventually in the process you realize what you should be actually building. We started out thinking we want to build Amazon web services like software. We realized that's not going to work. We had a natural language component to this whole thing, and it made things even more complicated as a product, right? So we started to realize that in the process of what we thought we wanted to build, we realized exactly what we should be building, and I think that really transformed everything. So I think anyone that's on the edge is just like Sahil Lavinya's advice is, get just get started, and you will figure out what you do in that process. So I think I would just echo those words. Yeah.
Yeah. And anything that you would like to highlight before we kind of call it a wrap in terms of what's happened over the years, uh, that one point or one story that we haven't really touched on yet?
Not that I can think of. Thank you for giving me the time to blabber so much. Well, I hope there was something there, but I think overall, I would just give a shout out to what we're building. Anyone out there that's looking to democratize AI in their organization, or lead the charge to building AI without background data science or without a solid data science team, should check out Office CI. But I guess that's a wrap from me.
Great. It's been such a pleasure, Nirman, having you here and having this chat with you. And we do hope that the community that we're building out will kind of interact with each other. I hope you're open to that. And we hope to see you back here soon with more stories to tell us as you kind of continue miling. Thank you very much. And that's it for today.
Cool. Thanks for having me. Yeah.
Yeah. Bye bye.